At the moment in our HTML, we've got everything that we need to actually start drawing, but we haven't got any code in our script.js to actually draw anything on the page. Now, if I just quickly go back to this P5 Get Started guide, I can see I've basically done this setting up here, and what I want to do next is my first sketch. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste some of this stuff from here. If you want to write it out yourself, it's pretty easy to write, and I can just copy and paste this in here. I've got a function called setup, which basically is where everything is set up. And then when I draw stuff, it's going to be drawn in a certain place. Now, I like to put a little bit of spacing in here just to make it a little bit easier to read, just personal preference. And I like to get rid of semicolons at the end. Just again, my personal preference. You can go with whatever you like. Now, what we should see now is an ellipse drawn at X and Y across and down at a certain size. So hopefully we should see something that looks like this. Now what I can do is start to kind of play around with this a little bit more. There's a lot of things within P5 that I can do. Instead of this always being at 50 and 50, what I could change this to is something like mouse X. Now I'll talk about where that mouse X comes from in a little bit, and also mouse Y. And again, I'll talk about that one a little bit too. But what we can see is we have this little area in the top of the page that we can start to draw inside of. Now, how come it's so small? Well, again, if you start to scroll down in here, what we'll start to see is we need some kind of canvas to be set up. So my canvas, well, this canvas here is this width. Mine isn't going to be so big. Instead, I'm going to set up my canvas by doing create canvas. And in brackets, I'm going to say this one is 500 by 500. So what we should see in this top corner is we have somewhere to draw inside of this 500 by 500. And you can see there, it's getting cut off at the edges of the page. Now, this is the area that we're going to be drawing inside of. Now, how do I make this in the middle of the page rather than the top corner? Well, there's kind of a few ways to do this. It's kind of up to you which one you pick. Now, what we can get is in our code, if I just quickly click here and I right click inspect, you might notice that there's this canvas appear in here. Now it's giving you lots of things in here. P5 has added this in when we've said set up. So I just want to move this into the middle of the page. So to move this in the middle of the page, I need to go into my style.css and I want to pick this canvas tag that's been added by JavaScript. So my canvas tag, I'm going to do something. Now you might notice that this is sad over here, and the reason why that is by default there isn't anything in here called canvas, so it's kind of getting confused because it's been added with JavaScript instead. So even though it's a little bit sad here, it's because it's automatically, programmatically as well, been added in. So I'm just going to add this in at position fixed. I want to put this in the middle of the page, top, left, 50% and 50%. Now, if I just leave it as this right now, what we'll get is, why is it down here? Well, technically, the middle point up here is at 50 across and 50 down. It's just not the center point isn't in the middle of the page. So what I want to do is shift this up and over just by 50% of this width and height as well. So I'm going to add in another thing in here, transform, if I spell transform correctly, and I want to translate by minus 50% and minus 50%. So this is going to move it back across by 50% of its width and 50% of its height. So this will basically make sure it's in the middle of the page. Now, of course, I don't want to be drawing circles. I'm doing a typography course, but we have something that is set up now and kind of looks pretty good. So what we'll talk about next is how we change this from circles and ellipses into actual type.